I've come up with a 4-step approach for you to improve your sleep based upon your meal timing, because it can be really frustrating when I say something such as don't eat 3 hours before bed to improve sleep. So you try it and it doesn't work. And then you get defeated, right? Well, not everything works for everybody. There's different circumstances. And I discovered this personally when I was in a pretty serious caloric deficit. My training had increased and probably just my overall caloric demand increased. So my sleep went to garbage. And when I cut out eating 3 hours before bed, for instance, in this particular situation, it made it so I wasn't able to get enough food in, and I was going to bed basically in a calorically deprived state, and it was waking me up. My sleep went back to garbage. So what I've realized is a lot of people face this even if they're not overtraining, okay? Because if you are dieting or you're changing your diet in general, a lot of times things can change. So this 4-step approach is simple. It starts with the simplest things to do, and if that doesn't work, move to this. If that doesn't work, move to this, etc. So let's go ahead and jump right in. One of the things you have to realize is that as a recreational exerciser, not an athlete, the likelihood of you overtraining and affecting your sleep is actually pretty slim. It's usually athletes that are overtraining. But what ends up happening is people that are recreationally exercising, they're also decreasing their calories, and it's a big shock to the system. So adrenaline gets going and it does affect sleep. So what I usually suggest that people do first and foremost is step 1. That is, cut out food 3 hours before bed. Okay, now the reason that I suggest this is because a lot of the literature points to this. When we are digesting food in general, you need to think of our digestive system almost like a muscle, okay? If we are stretching our muscle, we're gonna get feedback to the brain that says that muscle's stretched. We don't necessarily get that with the digestive system that we're aware of, but it is happening in the background. So if we're digesting food heavily, it is sending a signal to the brain that something's happening, and that can absolutely disrupt sleep. There was a study that took a look at 800 individuals, and they found that those that ate within 3 hours before bed, by and large, those were the ones that did not sleep well. The thing is that when you look at these studies about eating before bed, they're just talking about eating in a very general sense. They're not talking about what are they eating. So maybe these subjects are eating a lot of carbohydrates, right? So first step is, yes, 3 hours before bed, cut out all the food and see if that improves your sleep. But there's a chance that that's not going to improve your sleep. And that's very frustrating because we think that that should be the case because we need to align our circadian cues and all this and that. But think about it from a realistic point of view. Like, do you really think that our indigenous tribes and things like that would go make a kill and then be like, oh, we can't eat it at night? That's not reality, okay? I'm sure they ate at night. But we have science on our side now, and we know that, okay, eating during the day is probably better. That being said, the next step, allow fats and protein within 3 hours of bedtime, but cut out the carbs 3 hours before bed. Now, this is perfect when you start getting yourself into this caloric deficit or your training because your protein demands are probably higher, okay? And there's evidence that suggests that when you need more protein and you don't get enough protein, you're not gonna sleep as well. So this makes perfect sense. So how do you get the food in without disrupting your sleep? Well, you're gonna have a much less likelihood of disrupting your sleep with fats and protein than you are with carbohydrates. There's a study that was published in Clinical Sleep Medicine that demonstrated that carbs before bed tend to stimulate more arousal in the middle of the night, okay? We're not talking the fun type of arousal, we're talking the arousal where you're waking up in the middle of the night. Now with this, people will say, oh, well, carbs before bed are gonna make you sleepy because, you know, the blood sugar effect, like you rise and then fall and you fall asleep and you feel nice and peaceful. Not quite. It'll help you fall asleep, but it does negatively impact your slow wave sleep. So it does impact your sleep in a bad way, okay? And that's simply because a lot of times you're masquerading your hunger with carbs, and then once the carbs are digested, you're still hungry and you're waking up. So what I still suggest, okay, and as per a pretty important paper published in Nature Reviews, the more that we can stack our calories towards the morning, the better. That does not mean you have to cut out eating 3 hours before bed, but it does mean that you should start your day with a bigger meal and taper. So if you plan to have protein and fat prior to bed or within 3 hours of going to bed, you do need to make a concerted effort to have your calories higher in the morning and taper them as the day goes on, with that meal prior to bed being the smallest meal possible. I recommend usually something like maybe a little bit of fuller fat Greek yogurt, like 5% Greek yogurt and maybe a scoop of like protein or something, or maybe like 2 or 3 ounces of a ribeye steak, like something that's going to digest a little bit slower but give you some protein, right? I put a link down below for ButcherBox, by the way. Speaking of ribeye, I think they have literally the best ribeyes I've ever had, and I am not a huge like red meat person. I eat red meat, but I usually eat chicken and turkey and fish. But holy cow, you have to try it. So that link is down below for ButcherBox. They deliver meat directly to your doorstep. They are a sponsor on this channel, but I figured, hey, this is relevant and people like to snack on meat. So they have awesome grass-fed, grass-finished beef. They have the ribeye steaks, they have sirloins, they have New York strip, they have fillets, which my wife is a huge fan of. Of course, they also have chickens, whole chickens, pork, sustainable salmon, salmon burgers. It's like you name it, and then it gets delivered to your doorstep. And it's all really good prices too. So that link is down below. That's a special link, and you can check out some of the custom boxes that I recommend with cuts that I like as well. They've been on this channel for like 6 years now, so there's no denying I love them and I use them all the time. So that link down below for ButcherBox. The next step, okay, if you don't sleep well like that, is to actually eliminate the fat with that protein meal and just have it be lean protein, okay? And this lean protein, I would suggest you can even have within an hour before bed. The strategy with the lean protein is more about the tryptophan. Okay, if we have protein that's coming in, and animal-based protein has high amounts of tryptophan, then that tryptophan competes with other large neutral amino acids in the body, and it actually allows for more tryptophan to be available to go into the brain, convert into serotonin, and convert into melatonin. Higher levels of tryptophan tend to align with better sleep quality. So if you are someone that is having a higher training demand or your protein intake is low, this will be beneficial. There was a study that was published in Advances in Nutrition that found that subjects that ended up in like this 16% protein deficit ended up not sleeping well. They found like if protein levels were not where they need to be, like 16% lower than where they need to be for just balance, sleep was affected. So it's not just about calories, it's about protein too. And then there were 2 other studies that took a look at low calorie diets. These lower calorie diets, we noticed that when protein was added and increased, even in isocaloric situations, as long as protein was added, sleep seemed to improve. So a lot of the caloric deficit issues associated with sleep might potentially be mitigated by protein. So is it less about the calories and more just about, hey, we're not getting enough protein? It could possibly be. So that's where I'm like, okay, maybe we can increase protein in a very minimal caloric way, but also something that's easy to digest. So in this case, it's like maybe some fat-free yogurt an hour before bed. What I'll do is maybe fat-free yogurt with maybe a little protein powder, or maybe a little chicken breast, or maybe like some fat-free or low-fat cottage cheese. The reason I go low-fat in this case is I'm trying to eliminate variables. Option 2 didn't work with the fat and protein, so let's go with just protein a little bit before bed, and we're talking like 3 or 4 ounces at the most. The last thing that you can try is a combination of still having the lean protein, but also supplementing about 500 milligrams of tryptophan on top of that. The problem with animal protein, it feels weird even saying that. The problem with animal protein in this case is that even though it has a high amount of tryptophan in it, it also has a high amount of large neutral amino acids. And tryptophan and LNAs have to compete for one another. So to get into the brain. So in this case, even though tryptophan is high, the competition is high too. So it's all relative. Okay, in this particular case, plant-based protein is going to be higher tryptophan to LNAA ratio. But I'm not suggesting you go have plant-based protein. If you want to, please be my guest, okay? But I understand my demographics, and I know people don't necessarily want to hear that. So one of the things you could do, if you don't want to do that, is have like 2 or 3, 4 ounces of chicken or lean protein, Greek yogurt, whatever, and 500 milligrams of tryptophan supplementation. That way you're getting the protein that's satisfying the protein deficit need, but you're also getting the tryptophan that's helping that tryptophan to LNAA ratio to help serotonin production. If that doesn't work, there's nothing you can do, and you should probably just pop caffeine pills and stay up all night. But in all seriousness, I hope that this works really well for you, because it works for me when I need to reverse engineer why I'm not sleeping well. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.